Hey guys, I'm here to do my August wrap up. I had a great reading month. I read 8 books, so I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible so that the video is not too long. What I'm going to do this time around is something a little bit differently that I've seen on other channels, and that's I'm going to talk about the books from the highest rated to the lowest rated. So I'm going to start with my favorites and finish with my not so favorites. So I'm going to see how this goes. The first book that I want to talk about was my favorite book of the month, and that was The Rise and Fall of Alexandria by Justin Pollard and Howard Reed. I checked this out from the library. I had it on my list for like 2 years and I just never got around to it. But this time I checked it out and added it to my August/September MBR. And it was one of the first ones I picked up, and I'm so glad that I did. I absolutely love this book. This is basically a chronological account of the city of Alexandria, how it was founded, all the way to how it was ultimately destroyed or brought down. When the city was first founded, they built a library, which is the Alexandria Library, and that's what I was interested in reading about. And that's why I picked up this book, is because I have heard about the Library of Alexandria, but I didn't know anything about it, and it turns out that there's a lot that I didn't know. This book was incredibly informative, very readable. However, it's basically all history. So if you're not into history or historical documentaries, then I don't recommend this book for you because it is kind of long. Probably my favorite thing about this book was how many important discoveries were made because of the Library of Alexandria that a lot of people don't know about, and how they were sometimes 1,000 years ahead of their time. This library had hundreds of thousands of books, and so if it had survived and we would have been able to use all of that information, then we would have been probably 1,000 years ahead of our time now. So I can't help but think about that and make that comparison, and that was so much fun for me to read. So I give this book 5 stars. It was my only 5-star read, and I highly recommend it if you are into history at all, if you don't mind reading about historical facts, if you don't mind reading, excerpts from, old letters and books and things like that, then I think you will enjoy this one. The next one that I want to talk about is Red Sister. This is a new fantasy series by Mark Lawrence. I've never read anything by him, but I knew that I wanted to read a fantasy series. This is the first book of the Book of Ancestor series, and it was released this year. And I'm going to try to talk about this book as briefly as possible because it is the first book in the series, so it has a lot of information. The story is focused on a young girl named Nana Gray, and at the beginning of the book, she is sold by her family. Something happens where Nona defends a friend of hers, and so she hurts one of the fighters very gravely and almost kills him, so she's sent to be hanged. And just as she's about to be hanged, a abbess from the Sweet Mercy convent saves her. She pretty much kidnaps her and takes her to the convent. And this convent basically takes all of the novices and raises them to be, different sisters. It could be a red sister, which is what the book is about. They're kind of like assassins. And there's, mystic sisters and holy sisters. So you can kind of be, one of those things. And that's where her journey begins. Through the convent, she learns all about fighting, the path, poisons, all that stuff to kind of prepare her to be an assassin, essentially. So that's what the book is about. There's a lot of world building. There are 4 tribes. These are like, ancient tribes, and each tribe has kind of like a certain skill. So Nona is known as a Hunska, and Hunskas are very fast. There are the Garants, which they're pretty much big in size. The Margals, which they can kind of work a little bit of the magic, and then the Quantals can work more of the heavier magic. So if you have like 3 bloods in you, then you're seen as very rare. If you have all 4, you're like unheard of. It's very fast paced. There's a lot of violence, and it was just such a fun read. My only criticism would be that when there was discussion about like the path, the ancestor, the magic system, it kind of gets confusing and muddled at times. Sometimes I would reread a paragraph and I still didn't know what exactly I was reading. A lot of the fight scenes too were, I could tell that I'm reading something epic, but the writing didn't help me picture it as well in my head. Nona can do a lot of fast things. She can like twist and turn and curve in the middle of the air, all that stuff. And I can kind of see what he was trying to tell me, but I wasn't able to create like a really good picture. I almost wish that I could watch this in like a series and be able to really see just how awesome it looks. There's also some confusion with the nuns, the sisters, because there are sisters that are already, red sisters, mystic sisters, and holy sisters, and they take care of different parts of the lessons, and they take care of different areas of the convent. And some of these sisters have also a second name. So that was kind of confusing at first for me, because I'm already trying to keep track of all of the different novices that Nona's befriending. I'm trying to keep track of like the bad guys, that's a whole family. And I'm trying to keep track of the sisters and kind of keep all of the tribes in the back of my head. And of course there's still a story happening, so it didn't take away from the fun, but it required a lot of focus. Another thing that I kind of have an issue with the book was that Nona is supposed to be 11 years old for most of the book, but she does not read like any 11-year-old that I know. Now, I don't know if, Lawrence was trying to bank on the fact that she's been through a lot as a child or what, but, some of the things that she, the way she talked, the way she approached different things, didn't really feel like it came from the perspective of a child, and so that was kind of hard to believe. That said, I did finish reading this book in like 3 or 4 days. It was just that good, and I cannot wait to continue with the series. I just think it's a lot of fun, and I love badass characters. I thought it was a great story. Another book that I really enjoyed was The Six Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. I checked this out from the library, and it's essentially, in the title, she's talking about previous extinctions in the past, the first, second, third, fourth, up to the sixth, which is our current extinction. And there's a lot of information here. Definitely a book for people that enjoy science and reading about science, and also people that kind of enjoy history. If you love both of those topics, then this would be a great book for you. Throughout the book, she kind of does like glimpses into different events in history and introduces you to some like important characters and scientists and things like that. So it felt like a faster read, even though, it's not really like a short book. However, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very illuminating and also very sad. Do not expect like a happy ending at the end of this book. Don't expect like a ray of hope. It's not gonna be there, and I really wasn't expecting it because she's so matter of fact about it. But it really makes you think about the state of our world right now, and what's eventually going to happen. So it's really sad to read about, but it's also very important. So highly recommend this if you're into science or history or both. Another one that I really enjoyed was The Zookeepers Wife by Diane Ackerman. This is a nonfiction book, which I was not expecting when I went into it, because Diane Ackerman is a fictional writer. I think this is the only nonfiction book that she's written. I might be wrong about that, but I think so. And obviously there's a movie that recently came out about this book, so I kind of thought it was going to be a historical fiction novel, but it's not. It's 100% nonfiction. It's a story about the Zabinskis. They're a couple that live in Warsaw, Poland in 1939 when the Nazis invade Poland. So the story takes you from 1939 all the way up to 1945 when the war ended. The Zabinskis were the keepers of the Warsaw Zoo, and at first they lose all of their animals, but they're still able to stay there in the villa that they live at. And the Zabinskis over those years ended up saving about 300 Jews. They hid them in the villa and also disguised them as employees and things like that. The Zabinskis were also part of an underground resistance that was active in Poland at the time, and that was something that I did not know about at all. And that was very interesting to read about, the fact that the Poles really did suffer a lot. In the Nazi regime, Poles were seen almost as bad as Jews. So it's not like, because they were more Aryan looking that they got away with a lot more. It was actually really sad to read about the things that happened to them as well. I did have a few problems with it. The main one being that sometimes her prose didn't really connect with me. She would include excerpts from Antonina's diary or like news articles and things like that, and I could kind of see how I would have preferred her to write the book instead. So for example, I would read like an excerpt from Antonina's diary, and I wanted to keep reading that diary and not go back to the story that I was reading. And also she sometimes writes like blocks of text of unnecessary facts. For example, the Zabinskis were given like a big insect collection, and I swear Diane Ackerman lists like 100 beetles in like a paragraph. Like, I don't really care about that stuff, you know? However, I did enjoy that she made it chronological. That way we kind of, you know, went from the beginning of the war to the end and kind of saw how certain things were escalating. I loved all of the facts about the underground Polish resistance, the impact they were able to make. And I also like that I felt like she was very true to the Sabinskis and who they really were. She doesn't really paint them as, you know, saviors or people that were without, you know, imperfections. They were definitely flawed in certain ways, and they weren't like the most perfect couple ever. However, they worked together to survive, and so that's what this story is about. I almost wish that I would have kind of continued on with their story and seen what their lives were like after the war ended, but you know, the story has to end somewhere, so that's fine. The next couple of books I'm going to talk about all got either 3 stars or 3.5 stars. The first one that I enjoyed a little bit more than the other two was Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson. I gave this one 3.5 stars, and this was like a thriller slash mystery book. It's the story of a woman named Christine, and every time she goes to sleep, she loses her memory of that whole day. When the story opens, she's waking up next to a man who says he's her husband. So, you know, there's pictures all around the house, and she's obviously disoriented. In her mind, she's still 20 something years old, but you know, in the present day, she's in her 40s. She has kind of a shock every single time she wakes up. So the story was so entertaining. That's like the main thing that I got from this, was just how much fun it was to read. Very fast paced. It does have a lot of violent scenes in it. There's a lot of things that happen throughout the story that are hard to read about, but I just thought it was such a unique point of view. Christine, what she ends up doing is she starts writing about her days in a diary, and so a lot of the book is us just kind of catching up, and that helps her kind of center herself in the present. And so that's kind of where the story takes off, is you don't know who to trust, you're wary of every single character. Sometimes you're pitying the husband or being mad at the husband or not trusting the husband. Like, there's just a lot going on. And I do have to say that towards the end of the book, I kind of just wanted it to end. I just wanted to know the truth once and for all. But the book is short enough and, you know, fast-paced enough that you kind of are still engaged in the story. So this is a lot of fun. One for fans of like Gone Girl and Girl on the Train. If you liked any of those books, then you'll love this one. I gave it 3.5 stars because it was a lot of fun to read. It's not like, you know, super well-written masterpiece, but at the time it's just what I needed. Another one I read was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. This is a very popular book. I'm not going to go into the premise because a lot of people know what it's about. I thought this was just okay. Maybe I just expected it to be some groundbreaking philosophical work, and it just wasn't. It was very simple. But when it came to that scene where the main character is going to go through some life-changing experience, the writing becomes so confusing and muddy. It was like the most ironic thing ever, because up to that point, it was very simple. It almost read like a fable. And then you get to the part that really matters, and suddenly I don't know what I'm reading. You know, it was really weird. I can see why people enjoy it so much, especially people that are religious, but for me it just did not work. It was just okay. The next book that I read that was also just okay, I'm sad to say, is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was a book that I really wanted to love. The synopsis sounded great, and then when I started reading it, it started off really strong, and then I was just less and less in love with it. I buddy read this with Amanda Center here on BookTube, and we had a lot of fun discussing it, but she ended up loving it a lot more than me. This is a story about a young girl named Margaret Hale. Her father starts doubting his faith and his role in the church, and so he leaves the church and he moves the family up north to a town called Milton. And this town has a lot of like mill workers and people that are suffering, and so Margaret is introduced to this for the first time. She meets the man, which is like the love interest. He owns a mill, and they have a lot of discussions where they kind of have different viewpoints on poverty and workers' rights, and those were kind of fun to read about. I really like the idea of two characters who are supposed to fall in love to have disagreements and have different viewpoints on things and are able to speak freely. However, even though I enjoy those moments, and even though I enjoyed the character of Margaret as a whole, I did not enjoy this like as a love story. I guess I'm expecting something else when it comes to a love story, but I felt like the relationship between the two main characters, it was almost like they were just attracted to each other because they disagreed. But then also Margaret is going through a lot of hardships throughout the book. There's really not like a happy story happening anywhere in the book, actually. It's like hardship after hardship. And then finally, towards the end of the book, the characters reunite and they have like 2 pages where they talk to each other, and then all of a sudden they're together, and it was just not a satisfying ending for me. And I'm really sad to say that, because I really thought this was well written. I guess this is not the right love story for me, and so that's not to say that it was a bad book. It was just not what I was hoping to get out of a book like this. And then the last book that I read was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I gave this one 3 stars. And I also wanted to like this book because it has so much critical acclaim and it's such an important book to so many people. But for me, it just didn't work. This is a story of a young girl named Esther who has it all. She's educated, she's smart, she's beautiful. When Esther realizes that she has to eventually get married and that's going to be her life, she falls into a deep depression and has some sort of breakdown. So that's kind of what the story is about. This was a pleasant surprise in terms of the writing. I was not expecting the writing style to be what it was. And you know, Esther has such a personality. She's very sarcastic and unique in the way that she talks about her life, and I really enjoyed the parts where Esther questions society's demands on young women. I loved her kind of feminist slant to things. I thought it made her a very unique character. However, I think my issue with the book is that it never felt like a gradual descent into depression and a breakdown. It was kind of like, you know, Esther got really bad and then eventually got better. And even when she recovered, I felt like I didn't go on a journey of recovery with her. For me, it almost felt like I was being told what was happening and I wasn't really experiencing it with Esther, which is kind of weird because we were in her head the entire time. So that was kind of my problem with the book, and you know, I just could not give it an extra star. I thought about it and I thought about it and it just did not work for me personally. But I do understand why people love this book so much. There are so many great quotes in this story, and like I said, the writing was just great. So those are all of the books that I read this month. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books, if you disagree with me on any of these books or agree, or if you have any recommendations for me. I'd love to hear about them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.